Hallo Leute, ich bin Katja und ihr seht Deutsch für euch. I had a thought the other day. Say a person has a month to learn enough German to speak. Not perfectly correctly, but just be able to communicate and would want some structure to be able to rely on, aka grammar. What would be the bare optimized minimum of rules you'd have to learn that are not the same as the first few rules that you would learn in a regular A1 course, because obviously those are going to be very elementary, but you won't be immediately able to talk. So in my mind, what are, say, 5 basic concepts that give you a head start in forming German sentences? That's a list I compiled today. This list will of course not give you all the knowledge that you need to speak German correctly. I did not crack the secret code with this, sorry. You won't be fluent with this in a month, is what I'm saying. In fact, that is a challenge I feel confident to say is something that only a tiny amount of people would ever be able to pull off, and I guarantee you they would not be starting from zero. There is, however, a doable challenge that's also a great boost for your German no matter the level you start at. It doesn't take 1 month, it takes 2 months. And if you pull it off right, it's completely free. I am talking, of course, about the language sprint by Lingoda. Now, like I said, you can join the sprint at any level. There is no entry barrier based on how good you are at German at the moment. You get daily classes with professional native teachers at any time of the day that is convenient to you. And you can get 100% cash back at the end of it. In order to qualify for that 100% refund, you only need to attend every one of your classes. Basically, the sprint is a stellar opportunity for you to boost your fluency and your confidence while having that little extra bit of pressure if you want all your money back to really attend a class every single day, which will have you thinking in German in no time. You can sign up anytime from now until the 1st of February 2022. The sprint itself starts on February 11th. When you sign up, you can do that for either the sprint or the super sprint. The sprint only costs half the fees of the super sprint. It's 15 classes a month, so an average of 1 class every 2 days. And upon completion, if you attend every class, you only get half of your money back. Now, the super sprint is the real challenge. The super sprint is that format where you attend a German class every single day, so 30 classes a month for 2 months. And if you complete all of them, if you join all of the classes, then you get 100% of the money back that these classes usually cost. If you want to join, make sure you reserve a slot as soon as possible because the slots are limited and they usually fill up pretty quickly. You can sign up through the link in the description. Also, make sure you use my voucher code Katja2022 to save 20 euros or $25 off of your entry fee. I wish you viel Erfolg. Thanks very much to Lingoda for sponsoring today's episode, and now back to the video. Rule 0 is, by the way, that you need to understand that there's exceptions to basically everything in German. Not having an exception is an exception in terms of German grammar. I will also assume that our assumed learner of a month will be learning vocabulary on their own time, okay? That's not one of the rules. This is just grammar. So let's get started with rule number 1. There are cases. German uses cases, aka declensions. Declensions are a concept that affects nouns, adjectives, pronouns, and articles, so anything really that relates to nouns. By the way, if you have no idea what those terms are, like noun, adjective, pronoun, etc., I recommend you go watch a really early video I did, you can find here, just talking about a quick overview of all of those grammatical concepts. Now, declensions change the way that these words relate to one another in a sentence. This makes it possible for a noun to communicate its relationship to a different noun without using additional words like it would in English. What do I mean by that? Let's look at 2 examples. Sie sieht den Hund. She sees the dog. Now, would you believe me if I told you that the meaning stays exactly the same if I just turn this around? Den Hund sieht sie. If we look at the reverse, so the dog sees her, it would be Sie sieht der Hund or Der Hund sieht sie. Just because it's either der Hund or den Hund, I know whether the dog is the one who sees or is the one being seen. That is a very brief idea what declensions do. In English, we would just assume that the former always sees the latter because in English we mostly use a word order for that. To be fair, German would also usually use the order subject, verb, object, so sie sieht den Hund or der Hund sieht sie, but it's possible, and that's what declensions are for. So basically, they make us more flexible. German has 4 cases that you need to know about: Nominativ, Akkusativ, Dativ, and Genitiv. I made a video on all of them in the past, and I also made a video on each of them in the past, all of which you can look at if you want to, because I'm not, of course, going to go into super tiny detail here. I'm just going to give a quick idea of all of them. So very basically, the nominative is the basic state of a noun, and it is the case that is used for the subject of a sentence. So the noun, that is the actor in the sentence, the one who does something. Der Hund, die Katze, das Pferd. The Akkusativ is usually used for the direct object. So the object, the noun, the thing that is directly acted upon by the nominative subject. So in the sentence, sie sieht den Hund, der Hund is directly affected because it is being seen. So sie, Nominativ, das Mädchen, Nominativ, sieht den Hund, Akkusativ, because the dog is the direct object. The Dativ is then most commonly used for indirect object, so something that is also affected by the action of the nominative subject, but it's not directly affected, it's more affected as a side effect. The easiest example for this comes with the verb geben, to give, because I'm always giving something to somebody. The to somebody is the Dativ. Das Mädchen gibt dem Hund, Dativ, den Knochen. Das Mädchen gibt den Knochen, wem, Dativ, to the dog, dem Hund. In English, these objects are usually used with a to, like to the dog. She gives a bone to the dog. Sie gibt den Knochen dem Hund. Sie gibt dem Hund den Knochen. The genitive is the rarest of the cases and the hardest to understand, but as a general rule, it is most commonly used in relationships of possession. So, das Mädchen sieht den Hund der Nachbarin. Die Nachbarin is nominativ, but der Nachbarin ist genitiv. So, sie sieht den Hund der Nachbarin, sie nominativ, den Hund Akkusativ, der Nachbarin genitiv. In the science of changing nouns and other words like nouns, the cases are then joined by number, singular and plural, singular und plural, and gender, male, female, neutral, der, die, das. So we have 2 for number, 3 for gender, and 4 for case. All of these are combined to make up different endings. The good news is that we don't have as many endings as there are combinations, because a lot of combinations share endings. The basic rule to learn here is that once you are aware of this concept, you will have an easier time accepting that you have to learn a lot of forms for every individual word, unlike you do in English. Now, I promise that was the longest rule. Let's move on to the second one that actually still relates to it. Number 2, Akkusativ versus Dativ. Now, as you might have already caught on to, the cases are a huge topic and I will not be able to discuss all the minutiae here today because otherwise I'd really quickly run out of my 5 rules. But there is one that is, in my opinion, super easy and super important at the same time. That is, Akkusativ is for direction, Dativ is for place. But I thought you just said Akkusativ means direct object and Dativ means indirect object. Well, yes, super observant viewer, you are absolutely correct. But the cases are used for and triggered by different things, among them prepositions. So all those words like in, on, to, by, over, under, etc. And most prepositions trigger a specific case, some trigger more than one, depending on the context. And especially for those that can trigger a different case depending on the context, it's super important to understand this. Akkusativ means direction, Dativ means place. An example. Ich hänge ein Bild an die Wand. Versus das Bild hängt an der Wand. One means I am hanging it onto the wall, and the other means it's already hanging on the wall. In German, this is communicated by using Akkusativ for the direction and Dativ for the place. Same with Ich gehe in die Küche and Ich bin in der Küche. You could also replace the word direction with movement in some instances, but I find direction to be more specific and more generally applicable. So, Akkusativ means direction, Dativ means place. Number 3, how to conjugate sein. Even more super simple and super important. This is mostly learning stuff by heart, so you could potentially put it with vocabulary, but I elected not to. You need to know the forms of sein, to be, mostly because each of these forms is very different and none of them have anything to do with the infinitive, so sein, the base form. Side note, obviously for this, I'm going to assume that you've already studied the personal pronouns, so ich, du, er, sie, es, and man, wir, ihr, sie. That's just a note to my fellow grammar nerds. For the sake of this, I will classify this as vocab. Debate me. So, for the present tense, we have ich bin, du bist, er, sie, es, which are counted as one, because they all use the same form. Er, sie, es, he, she, it, ist. Wir sind, ihr seid, sie sind. Past tense. Ich war, du warst, er, sie, es war. Wir waren, ihr wart, sie waren. And lastly, gewesen. Now what the hell is that? Number 4, how to form the Partizip 2 or the G form. The so-called G form, also known as Partizip 2 or Partizip Perfekt in some contexts, is a participle that can be formed with any German verb. It's important because it's used in several German tenses, the passive and the conjunctive. Now the passive and the conjunctive you can perfectly get around at all times when you're speaking basically, but you will at some point want to talk about the past tense, and German spoken language mostly uses a combined tense, the Perfekt, that uses the Partizip 2. So it's good to know how to form it. In its easiest regular version, the G form is simply formed by taking the infinitive, so the base form of any given verb, and attaching a G in front of it. This is true for such verbs as sehen, gesehen. Ich habe ihn gesehen. I saw him. I have seen him. It's a bit tricky to translate this into English, but ich habe ihn gesehen. I saw him. Sehen, gesehen. The same is true for rufen, to call, rufen, gerufen. Or fahren, to drive, gefahren. Ich fahre, ich bin gefahren. A little harder, but still very regular, is what happens with another chunk of regular verbs. That being, you take your infinitive, you chuck off the en at the end, which is the regular ending for German verbs. Then you add a g in the front of the stem and a t at the back of the stem, and you end up with the Partizip 2 for such verbs as haben, haben, hab, gehabt, gehabt. Ich habe gehabt. Same as with lernen, lern, gelernt. Sagen, sag, gesagt. Spielen, spielt, spiel, gespielt. These two are how that works for regular verbs. The bad news is that there are a lot of irregular verbs in German and some regular verbs that work irregularly for the Partizip 2. Don't let this make your head spin. I would say for now, the super important one to know that is irregular is the one for sein that I already told you about in rule number 3. That is gewesen, because it's just very, very different from the base verb. Beyond that, I will now say something that will probably upset a lot of my fellow German teachers and probably would upset me if it wasn't me giving this tip. Just form it to the best of your ability with the rules that you know if you're in a pinch and you don't know the Partizip 2 of a verb that you're trying to use. You should learn the correct way to form it at some point, but people will understand you, and for now, that is our goal. And lastly, number 5, how do I use verbs in a sentence? German sentence structure can be a lot because it combines the idea of we have grammar, so we don't need that strict of a sentence structure to know what we're talking about, like English does, with, well, but we would still like some strict order, actually. So we can't just put stuff somewhere in the sentence, like not entirely, but much like Russian does. So we can't summarize it as easily as either of those cases, where in English you say, we always have the same sentence structure really, and in Russian you say, well, there's a few rules, but really you can just do whatever you want. In German, it's like, well, it's pretty free, but there's also some pretty strict rules. I made a whole video series on syntax, so I'm not going to be able to hammer home all of those concepts in this single video, but there's two that I think are very important and pretty easy to understand. The first one is that in a main clause, the meaning verb, so the verb that you conjugate, the verb that changes according to your subject, the verb that changes, goes either at the very, very front of the sentence, or it goes in the second position of the sentence. So if you want a more detailed and thorough explanation of this, I recommend my video on the before section, but the summary is this. You have a conjugated verb in a sentence that can only go in the first or second position of the sentence. If it goes in the second, then before it, there can only be one element. That can either be one noun, like der Hund, or it can be a pronoun, like ich. It can also be a combination of an article, a noun, and an adjective, like der große Hund, or two adjectives, der große braune Hund. It really doesn't matter as long as it's all part of one phrase. So a correct sentence would be, ich gehe nach Hause. It would also be correct if I turned it around and said, nach Hause gehe ich. What wouldn't be correct would be to say, ich nach Hause gehe, so I put both elements before the verb, or nach Hause ich gehe. Both of those are wrong. I need to decide for either ich or nach Hause to put before gehe. Different example, der große braune Hund frisst Fleisch. Or, Fleisch frisst der große braune Hund. Both of those are correct, just don't put them both in the same section. There are some sentences in which this doesn't work at all. For example, questions, that's the most important example. There you always put the conjugated verb at the beginning, so gehst du nach Hause? But for normal statement sentences, main clauses, this works. Now that's main clauses. My second simple rule that I want to put in this point of number 5 is in subordinate clauses, so the clauses that go after a comma, because, or while, that's subordinate clauses. In those, in German, the conjugated verb always goes at the very, very end. Always. Always, always, absolutely always. If it's not at the end, then whatever is after it is a new clause, okay? The conjugated verb always goes at the end of the sentence in a subordinate clause. So, ich will nach Hause, I want to go home, weil ich müde bin, because I am tired, bin at the end. Der Hund hat Fleisch gefressen, the dog ate meat, weil Hunger gehabt hat. Gehabt hat is the two parts of the verb, but the conjugated way, one, hat, is still at the end. Weil Hunger gehabt hat. Ich sage das, weil ich es sagen können will. Sagen können will. That's 3 verbs even. Sagen können will. But sagen and können are in an infinitive. Will is a conjugated way, will is a conjugated version of wollen, to want to. So, ich sage das, I say that, weil ich es sagen können will. Because I want to be able to say it. In English, you put the want at the beginning of the verb chain. In German, it's at the end because it's a subordinate clause. Weil, because, ich es sagen können will. Because I want to be able to say it. So no matter what, in a subordinate clause, the conjugated, the changed verb always goes at the very end. And in a main clause, only one element, whether that be a word or 5 words that belong together, can be before the conjugated verb. Now that's my 5 essential rules. I realize that some of them are pretty long, but give me a break. I can't reduce 5 essential rules to 1 sentence each. So let me know how you like this, please. Tell me if you agree. Tell me if you thought that one or several of these didn't belong on this basics list, or if you would have added something different. I'd be interested to know. Now, of course, I've made videos about all of the topics that I spoke about today in more detail. So if you want to refresh or learn for the first time about any of those, they are all linked in the description and also on the little I. You can click at any time and go check those out. But for today, that is it. Please don't forget to check out my Patreon. My patrons are a big part of what makes it possible for me to keep making these videos instead of doing another job. So, all of the lovely people scrolling by right now are people who support DFE on Patreon by giving a little bit of money for each episode. If you want to join those people, be on this list, get the scripts from my grammar episodes, much like this one, you can check that out at the link here, that's also in the description, and consider whether you want to become a patron. Thank you very much to everyone who's doing it currently, and a special thank you to anybody pledging $10 and more. You're great. Thank you. Your random word of the week is das Schienbein. I considered putting my leg on the table, but the internet is weird, so I'm not going to do that. Das Schienbein. That's the front bone that's in your lower leg. Das Schienbein. Don't forget to check out Lingoda. Thanks for watching. Viel Erfolg und bis dann. Tschüss.